Hey guys, welcome back to this channel, The Voice of the Past. In this video, we will unfold the untold story of the Beaumont family's forbidden inheritance, a pact with the devil. Before continuing, if you are new into this channel, please consider subscribing to this channel. Let's start. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows across the mahogany walls of the Beaumont estate. A tempest raged outside, rattling the century-old stained glass, while inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and wax. In the dimly lit study, Julian Beaumont stood over an oak desk, his fingers tracing the intricate seal on a brittle envelope. It had been hidden within the depths of the estate's archives, untouched for generations. Julian had always known there was something sinister about his family's legacy. Whispers of dark pacts, untimely deaths, and unexplained disappearances clung to the Beaumont name like an unshakable curse. His father, Victor Beaumont, had passed away unexpectedly just a month ago, leaving behind not just the sprawling mansion, but also the burden of their lineage. With a deep breath, Julian broke the wax seal. The letter inside was written in an archaic script, its ink faded yet legible. To the last of my bloodline, the price of our fortune is a secret buried in sin. The devil himself bore witness to our covenant. Tread carefully, lest you awaken what was promised. A chill ran down Julian's spine. His mother had always dismissed the rumors of their family's pact with the devil as nonsense, stories meant to keep children obedient. But Julian wasn't so sure anymore. His father's sudden death, the eerie occurrences in the house, objects moving, doors creaking open on their own, a lingering whisper in the halls, all pointed to something far more sinister than mere superstition. His father had never spoken much about their ancestors, but the few times he had, there was always a distant look in his eyes, as if recalling something too terrible to put into words. Now, with the letter in hand, Julian knew there was more to his family's past than he had ever been told. Determined to uncover the truth, Julian turned to the estate's oldest and most forbidden section, the underground archives. His father had always kept them locked, forbidding anyone from venturing inside. But now, with the keys in his possession, nothing stood between him and the secrets of the past. The entrance to the archives was hidden behind a bookshelf in his father's study. Julian had seen his father unlock it once as a child, but had never dared to enter. Now, as he turned the rusted key in the lock, the heavy wooden door groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. With a candle in hand, Julian stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with shelves of ancient tomes. But at the far end of the chamber, something else caught his eye, an iron door adorned with strange, intricate carvings. It was unlike anything else in the archive, and unlike any door he had ever seen. As he approached, a sudden gust of cold air swept through the room, making the candle flicker violently. Julian hesitated, but his curiosity won over his fear. He placed his hand against the door, feeling the rough metal beneath his fingertips. The moment he pushed it open, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the chamber. "You should not have come here, child of Beaumont." Julian froze. The words seemed to come from the shadows themselves. He turned, expecting to see someone behind him, but the chamber was empty. The candlelight dimmed as the air grew colder. Julian swallowed hard and stepped into the hidden room beyond the iron door. Inside, he found something he never expected. A large, leather-bound book resting on a stone pedestal. The book was old, its cover cracked and worn with age. Symbols were etched into the leather, their meaning unknown to him. He hesitated before reaching out to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed against the cover, the room shuddered, as if the very walls had come alive. The candlelight extinguished in an instant, plunging him into darkness. And then, the voice returned, whispering in a tone that sent shivers down his spine. The pact is sealed. The debt is due. Julian felt a presence near him, something ancient, something watching. His pulse quickened as an overwhelming sense of dread settled over him. What had his family done? And what price was he about to pay? Darkness enveloped Julian like a suffocating shroud. His breath came in shallow gasps as the oppressive silence of the hidden chamber bore down on him. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to steady his nerves. Then, slowly, a dim glow flickered to life, ethereal, unnatural, casting eerie shadows along the stone walls. The glow emanated from the book. It pulsed, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Julian's fingers trembled as he traced the ancient symbols on its cover. The strange, guttural voice that had spoken moments ago still echoed in his mind. The pact is sealed. The debt is due. He swallowed hard. What debt? He whispered. A gust of cold air swept through the room, and the pages of the book flipped on their own, settling on a passage written in blood-red ink. In the year 1713, Jonathan Beaumont made a pact with the one who walks between realms. Wealth and power were granted in exchange for the bloodline's servitude. Each generation must pay the toll, lest the shadow come to claim them all. Julian's blood ran cold. His ancestor, Jonathan Beaumont, had indeed been the one to elevate the family from obscurity into a dynasty of wealth. But no one ever spoke of how he had achieved such success so quickly. Now, Julian understood. The fortune had come at a terrible cost. His fingers traced further down the page. More text appeared as if written by an invisible hand. When the last Beaumont of the bloodline inherits the estate, the toll must be paid in full. Refusal brings ruin and death. Julian's pulse pounded in his ears. His father's sudden death. It hadn't been natural. It had been the price. And now, as the last surviving Beaumont, it was his turn. A loud bang echoed behind him. Julian spun around. The iron door had slammed shut. Then, a whisper, low, guttural, and coming from the shadows. Choose. The temperature in the room plummeted. Julian felt something watching him, unseen eyes boring into his soul. His breath came out in white puffs. Choose what? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The pages of the book flipped again, revealing a passage that had not been there before. Pay the toll with a soul, or be taken instead. Julian stumbled backward, his mind reeling. A sacrifice. That's what had kept his family's fortune alive. Every generation, someone had to die in order for the others to live. His father had been the last payment. Now it was his turn to decide. Offer another life, or be the one taken. The shadows in the room twisted, taking form. A pair of glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness, staring at him with malevolent hunger. The entity loomed closer, its presence suffocating. Choose. Julian's heart pounded. He wasn't ready to die. But could he bring himself to sacrifice someone else? The entity inched forward, its form shifting, growing. The candle he had left in the archive hallway flared back to life, its dim glow illuminating a single object resting on the pedestal beside the book. A dagger, a ceremonial blade, its handle adorned with ancient runes, its edge gleaming despite the dust that coated the rest of the room. Julian's stomach turned. The choice was clear. If he wanted to live, someone else had to die. And time was running out. Julian's hand hovered over the dagger, his fingers trembling. The weight of his family's sins bore down on him, suffocating, inescapable. His mind raced. Who had his father sacrificed? Had he chosen, or had he simply accepted his fate? The entity loomed closer, its form shifting like writhing smoke. Those crimson eyes burned into Julian's soul, unrelenting. Choose. The voice rattled through his bones. The shadows curled around him, tightening like a noose. Julian's heart pounded. He couldn't bring himself to take a life. There had to be another way. Swallowing his fear, he steadied his voice. What if I refuse? The entity stopped, its burning gaze narrowing. Then the pact is broken. Hope flickered in Julian's chest, but it was short-lived. The book's pages turned violently on their own, settling on a passage that hadn't been there before. To refuse the toll is to welcome the reckoning. The Forsaken will rise, and the bloodline shall be erased. A cold dread washed over him. This wasn't just about him. If he refused, it would mean ruin, not just for him, but for the entire Beaumont lineage. Even those who had distanced themselves from the estate, cousins and distant relatives, would not be spared. The shadows around him convulsed, growing more aggressive. The temperature dropped further, his breath now fully visible in the frigid air. Time runs short, child of Beaumont. The candlelight flickered, threatening to extinguish. The walls seemed to close in. His choices were dwindling. Julian took a shaky breath. Who did my father choose? The entity stilled. Then, slowly, the book's pages turned once more. A name appeared in ink that looked disturbingly fresh. Margaret Thorne. Julian's stomach twisted. Margaret Thorne, his father's old business partner. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances just a few years ago. He remembered the hushed whispers at the funeral, the unanswered questions. Now he knew the truth. His father had sacrificed her. His fingers clenched into fists. Was she innocent? The entity tilted its head. The toll does not discern between sinner and saint. It only demands payment. Julian's breath came fast and shallow. He felt sick. If he followed in his father's footsteps, he could live, continue the legacy, preserve the fortune. But at what cost? His mind spun, searching for a loophole, a way out. His eyes flicked back to the book, scanning for answers. Then something caught his attention, a passage nearly hidden among the aged pages. A Beaumont may seek absolution, but absolution is not given, it is earned. Hope flared in his chest. There was another way. He didn't have to kill. He could end this, break the curse. But at what price? The entity growled lowly. The shadows quivered, restless. What will you do, Julian Beaumont? The choice was his, and the clock was ticking. Julian's fingers tightened around the hilt of the dagger, but he didn't lift it. The weight of his ancestors' choices bore down on him like chains, but he refused to let them dictate his own. There had to be a way out, some way to break the cycle without taking another innocent life. He turned back to the book, rereading the cryptic passage. A Beaumont may seek absolution, but absolution is not given. It is earned. His mind raced. Earned how? What price was he willing to pay? The entity's form swirled like a storm, its patience wearing thin. The pact will not wait, Julian Beaumont. Julian gritted his teeth. Then tell me, how do I break it? The creature's burning red eyes flared. The very foundation of the chamber seemed to tremble at his defiance. Then, after a long, tense silence, the book's pages turned once more, revealing a passage written in deep crimson ink. The pact is sealed by blood. It can only be undone through the offering of one's own. Julian's stomach twisted. A life must still be given. His grip on the dagger loosened. You mean I have to die? The entity did not answer, but it didn't need to. The words in the book were clear enough. The blood debt required payment. If he refused to take another's life, then the only life left to give was his own. Panic clawed at his chest. His survival instinct screamed at him to reconsider. He could choose someone, a criminal, someone who deserved it. He could live, and no one would ever know. But that was the same justification his father had used, and his father before him. Julian took a shaky breath. He had spent his whole life believing his family's fortune was earned. Now he knew the truth. It was stolen, built on sacrifice. He could not let it continue. Slowly, he lifted the dagger. "You are willing?" the entity asked, its voice softer now, almost curious. Julian's heartbeat thundered in his chest. Fear clawed at his throat, but he nodded. "Yes." The air in the chamber shifted. The suffocating darkness seemed to retreat just slightly, as if considering his words. "Then speak the words, and seal your fate." Julian turned back to the book, his eyes scanning the passage. The ritual required a spoken vow, a willing renouncement of the pact. His voice trembled as he read, "I, Julian Beaumont, renounce the covenant made by my ancestors. I reject the blood price, the fortune built on sin, and the power granted by darkness. Let the pact end with me." The moment the last word left his lips, the chamber erupted into chaos. The shadows convulsed violently, the entity letting out a furious, ear-splitting roar. The book shuddered, its pages burning with an unholy fire. A searing pain tore through Julian's chest. He gasped, his knees buckling beneath him. It felt as if his very soul was being ripped apart. The entity's form writhed, screaming in rage. "You fool! You break the chain and invite oblivion." Julian collapsed onto the cold stone floor, his vision blurred, his strength fading. He had done it. The pact was broken, but at what cost? As the darkness closed in around him, he heard a final whisper barely audible over the chaos. "Let us see if the light will have you." Then, everything went black. Silence. For a moment, perhaps an eternity, there was nothing. No pain, no sound, no light. Julian floated in a vast, endless void, weightless and untethered. He tried to move, but his body no longer felt like his own. Was this death? Then, a flicker, a warmth. A faint golden glow pierced the darkness, growing brighter with each passing second. Voices, soft, distant, almost familiar, whispered around him. "He has chosen differently. Few have ever dared. Is he worthy?" Julian turned, searching for the source of the voices, but the void stretched infinitely in every direction. He felt weightless, his mind struggling to hold on to reality. Then a presence loomed before him, immense, ancient, and neither welcoming nor cruel. It was simply watching. "Julian Beaumont, you stand at the threshold." His breath hitched. "Am I dead?" His voice sounded small, fragile in the vastness. A pause. Then, "Not yet." Relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. But the blood price was real. A toll must be paid. You severed the pact. But now, you must earn what you seek. Julian's stomach twisted. He had already sacrificed everything. His inheritance, his family's dark security. Hadn't that been enough? "Earn what?" he asked cautiously. The warmth around him dimmed slightly. "Restore what was taken. Undo the sins of your ancestors, only then shall you return." His mind reeled. Restore what was taken. Did they mean the lives lost to the pact? The suffering caused by his family's selfishness? "How can I do that?" he demanded. "Most of those people are dead." A golden ripple spread through the void, and suddenly he was no longer weightless. The blackness around him shifted, replaced by memories. He was standing in a grand hall, chandeliers casting their glow across polished floors. He recognized it instantly. The Beaumont estate, decades ago. People were dancing, drinking, celebrating. And at the center of it all was a man he had only ever seen in paintings. Jonathan Beaumont, the one who had made the pact. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He had stepped into the past. See the cost of ambition. The voices swirled around him as the scene unfolded. He watched as Jonathan slipped away from the festivities, his expression grim. He followed the man down a dark corridor into the very archives Julian had just left behind. There, waiting in the shadows, was something else, something ancient. Julian's pulse pounded as he recognized the entity from before, the one who had demanded a sacrifice from him. But in this memory, it was not demanding. It was offering. Wealth beyond measure, the creature hissed, its form shifting like smoke. Jonathan hesitated only briefly before nodding, and with that nod, the pact was sealed. Julian's gut twisted in disgust. He had spent his entire life believing his family's fortune was earned, but it was stolen, bought with blood. Now you understand, the voice murmured. The scene dissolved, shifting to another. Julian watched as his great-grandfather made the same choice, then his grandfather, then his father. Each one faced the same choice, and each one chose wrong. But you, Julian Beaumont, have chosen differently. The warmth returned, wrapping around him like a cocoon. Now, you must do what they could not. Julian swallowed hard. How? You must set them free. The golden light flared again, and suddenly, he was back. Julian gasped, his body jolting violently. He was lying on the cold stone floor of the archive chamber, his lungs burning as if he had been drowning moments ago. He coughed, sucking in desperate breaths, his entire body trembling. The entity, the monstrous shadow, was gone. The book was no longer on the pedestal. The air felt lighter, no longer suffocating with dark energy. The oppressive weight of the pact had lifted. Had it worked? Julian sat up, his head pounding. Then he noticed something. His hands were glowing faintly, a golden shimmer fading from his skin. And his chest. Where the pain had seared through him before, there was now a mark, a single, intricate sigil, a symbol of his rebirth. The pact was broken. The curse was undone. But his journey was not over. The voices had been clear. His family's sins could not be erased with a simple refusal. He had broken the cycle, but now he had to atone for the lives lost. Julian clenched his fists, his determination solidifying. If he wanted to live, he had to make amends, and that meant confronting the ghosts of his family's past. Julian staggered to his feet, his head pounding as the weight of what had happened settled over him. The dark entity was gone, the book had vanished, and the unbearable pressure that had suffocated the Beaumont estate for generations had lifted. But he knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. He had seen the truth in the void. His family's wealth, their prestige. It had all been built on stolen lives, a legacy of sacrifice. Now, it was his burden to set things right. The golden sigil on his chest burned slightly, pulsing with energy. It was a reminder of his vow. Restore what was taken. But how? He left the archives, stepping back into the grand halls of the Beaumont estate. The house felt different, lighter. For the first time in his life, he wasn't haunted by the lingering sense of something unseen watching him from the corners. The whispers that once filled the halls were silent. He exhaled, his breath steadying. Then, movement caught his eye. A figure stood at the bottom of the grand staircase. Julian froze. It was his father. Victor Beaumont looked as he had in life. Tall, severe, yet always carrying an air of burden. But his eyes, they weren't hollow like the spirits Julian had seen before. They weren't empty. Julian, his father spoke, his voice steady, free of the weight it once carried. Julian's throat tightened. You're... A shadow of what I was, Victor interrupted. He took a step forward, his form flickering slightly like a candle in the wind. You ended it, Julian. The pact. Julian swallowed the lump in his throat. Then why are you still here? His father's expression softened in a way Julian had never seen before. Because you have unfinished work. You must release them. Julian's stomach turned. He knew what his father meant. The others. The ones who had been sacrificed. How? He asked. Victor gestured toward the great hall. Come, he said. Julian hesitated, then followed. The great hall of the Beaumont estate had always been the grandest part of the house. Gold chandeliers, marble floors, and oil paintings of ancestors long gone. But now it was filled with something else. Figures, dozens of them. Men and women, some from decades past, some more recent. Their faces bore expressions of sorrow, longing, and hope. These were the ones sacrificed over the centuries. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Margaret Thorne was among them. So was his grandfather and great-grandfather. They were all waiting. Victor stepped beside him. You must release them, he repeated. Julian's mind raced, but instinct guided him. He placed a hand over the sigil on his chest, feeling its warmth, its power. He closed his eyes. And then he spoke. To those bound by the sins of my ancestors, I release you. To those taken unjustly, I give you peace. No more shall this house claim your souls. No more shall this name carry the weight of darkness. The words echoed through the hall, vibrating through the very foundation of the house. The golden sigil flared, its light expanding outward like a wave. One by one, the figures began to glow. Their forms flickered, dissolving into light, their suffering finally coming to an end. Some wept, some smiled, some simply closed their eyes and faded. Julian's breath shook as he watched them go. His father was the last to remain. Victor looked at him with something Julian had never seen before. Pride. You have done what none before you could, Victor said quietly. You have freed us. Julian felt his chest tighten. Despite everything, despite the years of distance between them, this was still his father. Will I see you again? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor smiled, a true, genuine smile. Not in this life, son, but one day. And with that, he too began to fade. As his form dissolved into light, his final words echoed in the air. Live well, Julian. Live free. The Beaumont estate felt different the next morning. For the first time, sunlight streamed through the windows without the weight of something unseen looming over it. The air was no longer heavy with secrets. Julian stood on the balcony, looking out over the vast land his family had ruled for centuries. The fortune was still his, but he no longer felt bound to it. He would not use it as his ancestors had. He would not let it control him. He had broken the cycle. The past was finally at rest. And for the first time in his life, Julian Beaumont was truly free. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, hit that like button and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And let me know on which topic you would like to see stories next. And check out these other stories you might enjoy. See you in the next one. Till then, take care and goodbye.